Israel is urged to concede the historically and militarily most critical mountain ridges of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, in return for a U.S. or a multinational peacekeeping force, as well as U.S. security guarantees or defense pact. In order to be effective, defense pacts and security guarantees, including peacekeeping, monitoring, or combat forces, must be reliable, durable, specific, and politically, militarily sustainable. It must serve the interest of the foreign entity which dispatches the force, lest it be ignored or summarily withdrawn. However, U.S. commitments, guarantees, and defense pacts are characterized by four critical attributes: escape routes, designed to shield U.S. interests in a way which undermines the effectiveness of the commitments. 1. Non-specificity, vagueness, and ambiguity, facilitating non-implementation. 2. Non-automaticity, facilitating delay, suspension, and non-implementation. 3. Non-implementation if it is deemed harmful to U.S. interest. And number 4, subordination to the U.S. Constitution, including the limits of presidential power. For example, the NATO treaty, the tightest U.S. defense pact, as ratified by the U.S. Senate, commits the U.S. to consider steps on behalf of an attacked NATO member, as the U.S. deems necessary. Moreover, in 1954, President Eisenhower signed a defense treaty with Taiwan. But in 1979, President Carter annulled the treaty unilaterally with the support of Congress and the U.S. Supreme Court. The May 25, 1950 tripartite declaration by the U.S., Britain, and France included a commitment to maintain a military balance between Israel and the Arab states. However, on October 18, 1955, Secretary of State Dulles refused Israel's request to buy military systems to offset Soviet bloc arms shipments to Egypt, insisting that the facts were still obscure. In 1957, President Eisenhower issued an executive agreement to compensate for Israel's full withdrawal from the Sinai Peninsula, committing U.S. troops should Egypt violate the ceasefire and Sinai's demilitarization. However, in 1967, President Johnson claimed that the commitment ain't worth a solitary dime, while the UN peacekeepers fled upon the Egyptian invasion of the Sinai, the blockade of Israel's port of Eilat, and the establishment of intra-Arab military force to annihilate Israel. In 1975, President Ford sent a letter to Prime Minister Rabin, stating that the U.S. will give great weight to Israel's position that any peace agreement with Syria must be predicated on Israel's remaining on the Golan Heights. But in 1979, President Carter contended that Ford's letter hardly committed Ford, but certainly none of the succeeding presidents. In an April 1975 AIPAC conference speech, the late Senator Henry Scoop Jackson dismissed security guarantees as harmful delusion. According to Senator Jackson, detente did not save Cambodia and it will not save Vietnam, despite the fact that the US and the Soviets are co-guarantors of the Paris Accords. And that is something to keep in mind when one hears that the US and the Soviets should play the international guarantee game in the Middle East. According to Professor Noach Pelkovitz, political science, UCLA, in the context of security arrangements, there is only one chance in 3 that the protector will come to the aid of its ally in wartime, and then only at the discretion of the protector. What counts is the protector's perception of self-interest. Otherwise, the commitment is not honored. Professor Michla Pomerantz, International Relations, Hebrew University, stated that U.S. defense commitments, including the NATO treaty, are uniformly characterized by vagueness, non-specificity, and the explicit denial of any automatic obligation to use force in accordance with the desire of the U.S. as promisor to keep its options open. Evasion by means of interpretation would not be a difficult task. The stationing of foreign peacekeeping troops on Israel's border would cripple Israel's defense capabilities, requiring Israel to seek prior approval in preempting or countering belligerents, which would also strain U.S.-Israel relations. At the same time, appearing to have enabled Israel to act freely would damage U.S.-Arab ties. The assumption that inherently tenuous, intangible, open-ended, and reversible U.S. security commitments constitute an effective compensation for critical Israeli land, tangible, irreversible concessions, such as a retreat from the strategically and historically critical mountain ridges of Judea and Samaria, reflects detachment from the Washington constitutional labyrinth and recent precedents, engendering a false sense of security, thus compromising the very existence of the Jewish state, transforming Israel from a robust national security producing asset to a frail national security consuming liability, undermining U.S. interest and U.S.-Israel relations. The next video will further explore the idea that international and U.S. security arrangements and guarantees could compensate for critical Israeli land concessions.